Hey guys, welcome back to markdillon.com. If you're watching this on my YouTube channel, do me a big favor and click subscribe. I would really appreciate that. Now, tonight's video is a little bit different than my normal videos, where I'm answering your questions. This one is mainly, and I don't do this often, but it's just giving you my 2 cents on something. And I did a video not too long ago about a guy who emailed me uh, regarding a disagreement he was having with his partner over his partner's support for Black Lives Matter. Uh, and I have to say, I'm a little bit disappointed in some of the comments I saw, and I'm also, just in general, I'm disappointed with the opinion that a lot of people have with regards to that. Now, I'm even more disappointed when I see some of those negative comments coming from the gay community. Uh, and I don't want to turn this into just a gay opinion on Black Lives Matter. I'm going to give you my opinion overall, but I think that as the gay community, we're in a unique position to both sympathize and empathize with what the African American community has to deal with as far as the discrimination that currently exists. That they have to deal with on a daily basis. So sympathize because I think any decent person, gay or straight, black or white, Latino, Asian, male or female, any decent person should be able to sympathize when they and feel a sense of sorrow when they see other people going through any form of injustice. But empathize, we can also empathize because as the gay community has been discriminated against. As a whole, we understand what it's like to face systemic oppression. So, I am disappointed when I see hateful comments coming from the gay community with regard to Black Lives Matter. Now, just my general opinion on the topic. Uh, the idea when people say, um, well, Black Lives Matter is inherently racist, like when you see that idiot Rudy Giuliani on TV. Well, no, when you say Black Lives Matter, it doesn't mean other lives don't matter. It means that historically, Black lives haven't mattered as much, and that has led to problems with systemic injustice. It's not the same as, saying, for example, something is hot, therefore by definition it can't be cold. Saying Black Lives Matter does not preclude the fact that other lives matter as well. It's not saying Black lives matter more. It's not saying Black lives are the only lives that matter. So I find it to be really silly when people make that point. Imagine, for example, during the women's suffrage movement, that when women would say, well, women's rights matter. Does that by definition mean men's rights don't matter? No, that would be absolutely absurd because there historically there has not been a problem with men's rights not mattering. Although certain groups of men have had their rights denied them. But and then you look at it from the perspective of the gay community. When we advocate for gay rights, for equal rights, are we saying that other rights don't matter? Are we saying that straight rights don't matter? No, but historically there has not been widespread discrimination against people for being straight. How many young straight people do you know have been kicked out of their home because they were born straight? It doesn't happen. So it is a moot point to say when you say Black Lives Matter, you're saying other lives don't matter. You have to look at the context in its totality. Context really does matter. So I don't agree with that point at all, and I don't think saying Black Lives Matter is racist. I think if you said only Black Lives Matter, well, of course, I would have no respect for anybody who said that. Um, and you will certainly find bad apples in any movement, whether it be the pick any movement you want. You will find people who don't represent it well and say things they shouldn't. Now, the idea that somehow if you are a supporter or sympathizer with Black Lives Matter, that you don't care about the police, that's ludicrous. I mean, for example, the lunatic who uh, killed the police officers in Dallas, he was actually rejected by a number of Black Lives Matter groups. He went out on his own. He was a crazy person. He doesn't represent Black Lives Matter. And furthermore, are there going to be people in Black Lives Matter who say things that are against the police, or who advocate violence towards the police, or who are, happy when something like that happens? Of course, those people deserve no respect. They shouldn't be legitimized, but they don't represent the entire movement. We focus so much on something like the Dallas shooter, and people try to lump him in with Black Lives Matter. And he was not a part of Black Lives Matter. But let's say he was, for example. Does that mean that the entire movement deserves to be painted with that brush? No, of course not. Because if you're going to point to him, then you also have to point out all the people in that movement who are speaking out against him, who don't support his use of violence. So I just, the idea that somehow you automatically have to you have to hate the police if you support Black Lives Matter. I don't agree with that. And, but actually for some historical context, if you know anything about the um, women's suffrage movement, if you know kind of Alva Vanderbilt's role in that, she one time said something to the effect of, "If men don't give women the right to vote, women should take to rifles." Now imagine if the entire women's suffrage movement was painted with that, by that one quote, painted with a broad brush, that all women are, now they're looking for violence. They're seeking rifle. They're going to come at us with rifles, demanding the right to vote. That would be ridiculous. So why use that logic for something like Black Lives Matter? Um, you can disagree with tactics that they use. Uh, I don't, for example, agree with them disrupting gay pride parades around the country. I don't agree with some of the comments that have been made after, mass shootings and things like that. But that doesn't delegitimize their entire cause. You can also argue that they should have a more comprehensive, policy solution that they're fighting for, so that the protesting is a means to an end. But at the same time, that's what happens when things reach a boiling point. People are angry at the injustice they're seeing. And by the way, when you look at those protests, it's not just black people. You see white people, Asian people, Latino people, young, old, male, female. A lot of people recognize there is a problem. And by the way, just because you recognize there's a problem, that doesn't mean you're saying America is terrible, all police officers are terrible. You're saying we recognize there is an issue here. How do we fix that? How do we rectify that? I saw an article in Bloomberg just today that said unarmed. Now, we're not talking about criminals, unarmed black men are 5 times more likely to be shot than unarmed white men. That's the statistics. The statistics don't lie. When you have one person who's 5 times more likely an unarmed person who's 5 times more likely to be shot than someone else of a different race, there is a problem there. I mean, I was shocked when I saw this, but even Newt Gingrich came out and said there is a problem in America that many white people don't understand. And I'll have to put the link to this in the video description. I don't know if you guys watch the Young Turks, but they're an online news show that I watch, and they did. I have his name down here. They did an interview with a former Baltimore police officer named Michael Wood, and I have to tell you, I was shocked at that interview where he describes the systemic racism that he observed in the police department. I mean, I was really shocked because it's one of those things where you just don't assume that it's that bad or that prevalent. And here you have a retired white police officer explaining to you what really goes on. Now, he's not saying all police officers are bad. He's not saying anything to that effect. But he's saying there are some systemic problems within law enforcement that have to be addressed. And the example that I use, and I've discussed this, I mean, time and time again with, I've got a really good friend who happens to be a law professor, and sometimes we will spend, I'm not kidding you, I actually spend more time on the phone with him when we have a phone conversation than I than I do with my sister. I talk to her more frequently, but when my friend and I get to talking about these issues, we can literally talk for 6 hours. I've had phone conversations with him for 6 hours. So, I've thought about these things and I've discussed them at length with people. And the example that I always use is Tamir Rice. The two cases that bothered me the most are the Trayvon Martin and Tamir Rice. That's not to say that the other ones aren't deeply disturbing, but I asked myself if, in the case of Tamir Rice, if you had a young 12-year-old white kid playing in a playground with a toy gun in Beverly Hills, and the police drove up, do you really think they would have drove up, pulled their guns out, and shot that kid in 2 seconds? Of course not. But that happened to Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old kid in a playground playing with a toy gun, shot within 2 seconds of the police pulling up. You can't tell me there's not an issue there. And then, look at the Trayvon Martin case. Ask yourself if George Zimmerman had been black and Trayvon Martin had been a young white kid, and the exact same scenario happened, would George Zimmerman have been acquitted? No, absolutely not. The fact that it's not even saying that anybody who is involved in the shooting of a black person has done so with their intentions driven by racial malice, or the fact that if somebody is not convicted, that somehow that is an inherently racist decision. But in that case, it is shocking. There's no way you can make a logical argument that George Zimmerman was not acquitted because of a racial bias. And it's not just looking at interviews with people like Michael Wood or any number of people who've given their own personal take on it. But I think to my ex-partner, who I'm to this day super close with, he's one of my best friends. Actually, when he had his wedding, he had it in New York, and he and his husband stayed with me. I had an apartment in New York at the time, and they stayed with me for a week. But his husband is black, so he tells me time and time again, when he gets pulled over and he's by himself, he has no issue whatsoever. They check his license, they check his insurance, they send him on his way. If he gets pulled over with his husband, the dynamic is totally different. The officer is immediately more suspicious. Sometimes they're told to get out of the car and they're patted down. So, there's no argument you can make that will convince me that there is not some systemic problem that has to be addressed. That doesn't mean everybody involved in law enforcement is guilty. That doesn't mean all police officers are bad. That doesn't. And by the way, it also, I think that you can disagree. Like as I said, you can disagree with certain tactics Black Lives Matter use, and that doesn't make you a racist person. But I think when you turn a blind eye to someone else's injustice, that causes me to question your character. It's one thing to question the tactics that the movement uses, or say they should have better policy platforms and things like that they're fighting for. But to just pretend that it doesn't exist and start, throwing out the other argument is, well, and this is the thing that I heard that idiot Rudy Giuliani say, well, uh, well, black people are more likely to be killed by other black people. That's true. But the other thing he doesn't tell you is white people are also more likely to be killed by another white person. So just statistically speaking, you're more likely to be killed by someone that you interact with on a daily basis. So if you live in a primarily black community, you're more likely to be killed by someone who's black, and the same thing if you're white. So, you know, statistically speaking, most whites are killed by other whites. So when you make the point that most black people are killed by other black people, well, you're somehow implying that what they're genetically predisposed to be more violent or something like that. And yes, when you're talking about violence in you know, uh, cities like Chicago or Washington, D.C. or Oakland. Is black on black violence a big issue? Yes, because a lot of innocent black people are being harmed by, gangbangers and people who legitimately deserve the name thug or the description of being a thug. Yes, that is certainly an issue, but that doesn't mean that systemic racism in law enforcement or systemic bias in law enforcement isn't also an issue. One doesn't preclude the other. We both need to be addressed. But the idea of saying, yes, just because there's black on black crime, that somehow we have to turn a blind eye to the fact that, an unarmed black man is 5 times more likely to be killed than an unarmed white man. That's not acceptable. So, yes, you can point to situations like Chicago. You can point to situations like Oakland where you have really high rates of black on black crime. But that needs to be addressed too, just like the systemic bias and racism in law enforcement has to be addressed. One does not preclude the other. So when you have idiots like Rudy Giuliani getting on TV and pointing out the fact that there's black on black crime, I want to be like, well, no shit, dumbass. There's white on white crime, but there's also gay men do violent things to each other. That doesn't mean I think that we shouldn't address uh, discrimination towards the gay community. Just because you can point out the fact that sometimes gay men are hateful to each other, we should say, oh, well, it's perfectly acceptable for other people to be hateful towards the gay community because we can find some examples of gay men being hateful to each other. In no other dynamic would that make sense. But somehow, when you have idiot Republicans get on TV, they think because they point to examples of black on black crime, somehow that excuses violence towards minorities by the police. That makes no sense whatsoever. So I just want to encourage you to think uh, rationally about these things and ask yourself that if something similar happened in a different context, would the result be the same or would the logic make sense? But for some reason, when you talk about racial issues, logic seems to get skewed. And that's my 2 cents. I'm not going to talk to you guys for 6 hours like I do my friend, but that's my 2 cents. And if you want to send me an email giving me your opinion, that is perfectly fine, as long as it's rational and well thought out and not obviously biased. I'm happy to have a discussion with someone that I think presents an intelligent, a point of view that's opposite mine but intelligently presented. I think having a discourse about this stuff is a good thing. But just think logically and think compassionately. That's the most important thing. So, I'm a great admirer of Elie Wiesel. If you haven't read his books, if you haven't read Night, you certainly should. I think his death is a terrible thing for the world. But one thing he always said was that the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. I don't know that I agree with that in its entirety, but who am I to critique Elie Wiesel? But I do agree that indifference to things like this is not acceptable. So when you see something wrong, you should recognize that, and you should do what you can to take a stand against that. And as I said in my last video, that doesn't mean that you have to uh, be out in the street protesting. That's not for everybody. But think about it when you're at the ballot box. Think about it when are presenting your opinions to someone else. Um, and, I actually think that the the world would be a much better place if people thought more compassionately. And if you just asked yourself, if I was if I was in on the opposite side, how would I want someone else to think about my situation? If I had to deal with oppression or the fear of being unjustly profiled or assaulted by the police on a daily basis, how would I want somebody uh, to think about my situation? Would I want them to start nitpicking every single thing they could about the community I come from or all of that? Or would I want somebody to say, hey, that's not right. That's, this shouldn't be going on. So, just remember, and also this is another, I thought I was wrapping this thing up 5 minutes ago, but I do want to make this point. This is another thing that I hear all the time, particularly when I'm back in Mississippi visiting my family. Not from my family, but just, you overhear people's conversations, or you have this debate with an acquaintance, and you hear people say, well, we have a black president. So there can't be systemic racism left in the country, or there can't be discrimination, blah blah blah. Well, that's just not true. We also have gay marriage. Does that mean that there's no discrimination against the gay community? Of course not. We have a long way to go when it comes to eradicating that, and we have made great progress in terms of race relations, but we still have work that needs to be done. So don't say, well, we have a black president, so obviously there can't be any systemic racial bias left in the system. I mean, that's foolish. I mean, I literally had this debate with, I don't want to say a friend, but an acquaintance from the gym, and he pointed to people like Oprah and Jay-Z and Beyonce, and you just look at and you think, bless this poor idiot's heart, because he just doesn't get it. Yeah, you will always find people who, no matter what obstacle is placed in front of them, who are either so smart or so driven or so talented that they will overcome just about anything and be successful. But that doesn't mean that other people who are not born with those gifts aren't able to overcome, systemic obstacles in their way. And I use this example in the last video I did, which was, we're all running a race in life, and we're all trying to win first place. But you've got some, and I experienced a lot of challenges when I was young. I didn't have all the advantages that other people did, and after my mom died, my dad had a drug problem and all of that, and he wasn't super good to us. But I never did a drug. I don't drink. I went on to start my first business at 19, and completely started my own business independently at 21. And I ended up doing really well for myself. So I used to think, well, whatever your obstacles are, it's your job to overcome them. There's always going to be people throwing things in your way. But as you get older, you start to realize that, yes, I had some challenges, but I also had a lot of advantages that other people didn't have. For one, I didn't get stopped and harassed by the police, on my way home from school or my way home from work. I wasn't profiled. I wasn't, and even though uh, yeah, I said, during my childhood I had some problems, but my dad, when he got clean and sober, he started his business, and that ended up doing really well. And then he did a lot of good things for me, things that other people, from different backgrounds didn't get. So, you know, my point is the idea that we're all uh, we're all given different hands to play out in life, but you never want to accept someone stacking the deck. So, always be mindful of that. Be mindful of the fact that everybody is not, just because you haven't experienced something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So there you go. I need to stop myself now before I end up talking for another 30 minutes. But that's my 2 cents on Black Lives Matter. So guys, thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks.